Demi-Humans. They are the fractured reflection in a broken mirror, a people of countless forms and faces, each one a fascinating splinter of a whole I can't quite piece together. Yet I am utterly convinced there is one singular, broken thread I must keep pulling, their strange obsession with simple string, and the undeniable madness that seizes them when the sun dies. As the world plunges into darkness, I see a crimson fever boil their blood, twisting them into something unreasonable. I can't prove why this happens, not definitively. If I were to cast my own soul's wild guess into the void, I'd whisper of an ancient lineage, a forgotten tie to the fallen sun realm, though I must confess this is a belief built on air, not stone. And still, I must insist you look past what I see as their primitive shell, for I firmly believe they harbor a cunning mind, one capable of, at the very least, harnessing fire in grenade form. I'd wager my sanity that all that string they hoard is the key to this craft. In any case, while I absolutely perceive them as a hostile race of creatures, I am convinced their aggression stems from a fierce, almost primal territoriality. This, I believe, is the primary source of all their trouble. I've personally witnessed them declare war on virtually anyone who trespasses, and it always seems to be over land. But here's what I need you to understand. If you encounter them in the light of day, I've discovered they are not the mindless, feral monsters many paint them to be. The truth is, they possess the gift of speech, or, at a bare minimum, our beloved Bach does. It's clear to me they fashion their crude equipment and clothing from materials they either hunt down or scavenge. But as I've stated, my mind reels at the sheer number of subtypes, the staggering variety among the Demi-Humans, which I feel we are obligated to examine. To begin, and I'll freely admit these little ones are likely my personal favorites, the Demi-Humans. I just find it utterly charming how they attempt to camouflage themselves in tall grass, concealing their forms among livestock and other animals. The fact that they brandish an enormous bowie knife, a weapon that to me looks as large as their entire arm, is just aesthetically brilliant. As I've observed, their main tactic is to attempt a stealthy approach, aiming for a critical hit or a backstab, so you must remain vigilant. In my experience, however, they are quite simple to detect, even when concealed. I just believe it's a wonderfully realized small detail that they even make the attempt to blend in. I'm convinced the perfect location to observe this behavior is at the Craftsman shack site of Grace, which is very close to the Hermit Village. There, they've overrun an entire settlement of what I can only assume are celebrants, though I'll return to that point later. I just think these small ones are incredibly cool. To my eyes, their movements almost perfectly mimic a downsized version of the Demi-Human war chief, a figure I will most certainly be dissecting shortly. Continuing on, we have the next group, which I've personally dubbed the Demi-Human regulars. For me, these individuals are the quintessential examples of what the average Demi-Human presents as. I perceive in them sharp, pointed canine or perhaps goblin-like ears, pronounced fangs, and a facial structure I can only describe as ape-like. They absolutely strike me as Elden Ring's unique interpretation of the classic Goblin archetype, and in a direct parallel to their smaller kin I just discussed, I see these regulars as innate scavengers. I mean, one look at their armaments tells the story. I am thoroughly unconvinced the Demi-Humans are forging these blades themselves. Just like most of their kin, I've found these regulars are frequently carrying string. In fact, I'm almost certain they represent one of the single best farming spots for it in the entire game. So I'd advise you to file that away if you ever plan one of those consumable heavy builds. I've also noted they sometimes adorn their faces with white paint, which looks strikingly similar to the paint worn by some of the Beastmen you run into much later in Farum Azula. This observation leads me to a personal hypothesis. Is it possible that the Demi-Human race as a whole is the product of interbreeding between regular humans and those Beastmen? But, I plan to speculate further on that as we proceed. Regardless, I typically observe these regulars carrying fauchards, and I find you can almost always see them moving in groups. They aren't, in my opinion, usually leading patrols, but they invariably form the main body of those forces. I've noted they are commonly found in the company of these other types, whom I tend to think of as the veteran rags. I find these individuals are quite easy to distinguish from other demi-humans, as I see them wearing a kind of makeshift bridge and hood that conveniently covers one of their eyes. This detail becomes, in my view, especially apparent at night when the demi-human blood boils and their eyes ignite with a red glow. With these ones, you will only perceive a single glowing orb. Anyway, as what I consider the next step in the demi-human hierarchy, they possess a superior weapon to the fodder. They have the club. To their small stature, however, it must look like a large club given its immense size relative to their own. The most senior and formidable of this type I have witnessed are often granted a spiked club, which I interpret as a clear symbol of their station. I have frequently discovered these veterans rummaging through refuse or high grass, or simply marching in patrols alongside their less experienced counterparts. Now, what I see as the next rung on the ladder is occupied by the mighty demi-humans. These fighters are the largest of all the regular, non-chieftain, non-queen demi-humans. I have found that they are almost exclusively seen wielding that spiked club, which I read as a clear indicator of their seniority. They possess the same general appearance as the regulars, only magnified, very primitive, in my estimation, very ape-like, and utterly goblin-esque. In stark contrast, their leadership figures look to me like they are developing beast snouts and are perhaps, in my opinion, related to rune bears or even wolves of some description. But I will address them next. In fact, I believe there's a strong possibility that the demi-humans, at least the lesser ones who are not chiefs or queens, are fundamentally a distinct subspecies. It's possible in my mind that they are effectively the worker bees of their kind, a theory that would also neatly explain why they never achieve the grand size of the queens and chieftains. Conversely, I suppose it is also plausible that as a demi-human gets older, he becomes progressively more animalistic over the years. Under this theory, perhaps only a select few ever reach a size comparable to a chieftain, and by the time they do, they have already grown the snout. Honestly, who can say for sure? I feel this is a topic ripe for a great deal of speculation. Following them, we have the war chiefs, whom I personally see as second in command only to the queens. These specific individuals, I've noted, fight with a ferocious velocity using a pair of twin daggers, a style not unlike their miniature brethren. To my mind, they function as the essential military commanders of the tribes. In a situation where a queen is absent, I believe they step up to become the de facto leaders of the entire group. And, staying true to their title, I have found the chieftains can frequently be seen leading patrols of their smaller comrades deep into enemy territory, an action I presume they take on behalf of their queen. It is, in my observation, a firm rule that these chiefs are always larger than their subordinates, most often presenting as the lesser demi-human chief. However, some of them, like the ones I personally battled in the coastal cave, are clearly capable of growing to a size that rivals even a queen. And, just as it is with the queens, I've discovered that felling one of these leaders will usually cause all the other demi-humans in the vicinity to surrender and cringe in fear, though I have seen some of the mighty ones remain defiant. But let's finally move on to the queens. The truth is, there is only a small number of these figures of demi-human royalty, and I find they are rather spread out across the map. They possess what I can only describe as a truly unique aesthetic, even when compared to their own kind. As I alluded to a bit earlier, I firmly believe the chiefs and queens are conspicuously different from other demi-humans, and I'm not just talking about the obvious disparities in size. I perceive them as being far more beast-like and significantly lankier than their lesser kin. To illustrate my point, the regular demi-humans have hands for feet, much like real-world monkeys, whereas I've personally observed the legs of the queens and chiefs are evolving to be more dog or cat-like, a change that I see reflected in their posture and movement. Although I find it is not explicitly clear if they are part dog, part wolf, part bear, or part lion, or perhaps even a combination of all of them, it is my absolute opinion that they are clearly part beast. In any event, they are vastly more formidable than the smaller ones, so it is not difficult for me to understand why the lesser demi-humans capitulate if you eliminate one of their leaders. It truly appears to me as though the demi-humans maintain a society that is very much like that of bees. And from everything I can gather, there are no female grunt-level demi-humans to be found. I believe the only female demi-humans we ever encounter are the queens themselves. And while all the queens share the same general look, I have certainly noticed there are some distinctions. For instance, the queens found in the Lux ruins and the Volcano Cave both possess glowing purple eyes, which, as I've stated, I think hints at an ability to see in the dark. Now, there's one particular trait that I believe every single demi-human queen shares, and it is the fact that they were all taught sorcery by sorcerers from Raya Lucaria. I interpret this as an act that was seemingly done purely for amusement, or for shits and giggles, in a manner I find similar to how we teach sign language to gorillas in the real world. That said, judging from the description of the staff, I would argue the sorcerers were perhaps a bit more malicious about it than simple curiosity. Another trait I've observed that all the queens have in common is the bizarre, tribal-style markings, or perhaps tattoos that cover their bodies. This could, I suppose, merely be a demi-human custom. It's possible these markings are bestowed upon them when they are first designated as a queen. But one incredibly interesting detail I noticed was that these exact markings bear a powerful resemblance to the patterns adorning the armor of the Bloodhound Knights. This is profoundly curious to me, primarily because the Bloodhound Knights are undeniably very beast-like, much in the same way the demi-humans are. They even, in my view, move in a similar fashion. I have to speculate that perhaps the Bloodhound Knights were originally demi-humans who were raised separate from their tribes. To my eyes, they look as if they might even be chieftain-tier demi-humans. It's conceivable they were taken from their tribes by certain noble houses, or, as an alternative, they were traded to the noble houses by the demi-humans themselves. Maybe this was even part of a bargain in exchange for magical knowledge. And I believe these Bloodhound Knights then go on to craft their own armor, incorporating this intricate design that so closely mirrors the tattoos of the demi-human queens, almost as a way of honoring their heritage. Furthermore, as I recall, the demi-human concept art does include a depiction of one of them without their helmet. And although it is rendered from a distance, you can, in my opinion, clearly make out that they have a beast-style head, one that is highly reminiscent of the demi-human chieftains or even the queens. I will concede, however, that it still appears a bit more canon-like than those other demi-human heads. It's entirely possible, I suppose, that the similarities in the armor's symbol and the tattoo's symbol are just a complete coincidence. I mean, I must admit that is always a possibility. Anyway, though, I am convinced the most imposing of all demi-humans will always be the queens. As the astonishingly competent leaders of the demi-humans, the queens, much like the very chess piece they are named for, have a wide array of tricks up their sleeve. It's obvious they are formidable combatants, but they also strike me as being remarkably cunning. Perhaps this cleverness is merely instinctual or inborn, but I think their capacity to practice magic strongly suggests they possess a higher tier of intelligence than, at the very least, most, if not all, of the lesser demi-humans, with the potential exceptions of the chiefs and, of course, Bach. The queens also seem, from what I've witnessed, fairly skilled at managing their territories for the most part, and in some situations, even expanding them. But when it's time to actually fight, I find that due to their large, lanky frames, the queens are not nearly as agile as the chiefs. They are forced to move around in a somewhat clumsy manner, crawling and so on. This, I believe, obviously impacts their combat prowess, but I have seen that they are able to compensate for this weakness by having magic on their side, a skill they acquired after the sorcerers taught the queens magic to, quote-unquote, broker peace. And as it happened, the queens showed a real aptitude for spells. It was mostly simple stuff at first, I've noted, like the glintstone pebble, but they ultimately went on to master the crystal burst, a spell that required them to grasp the faint cognition of the crystallians. This, to me means they are capable of at least partially understanding or interpreting some of the wisdom held within the stone. However, I have personally witnessed that if a queen sustains enough damage, she will completely abandon her magical knowledge. She will literally huck her staff at the player and adopt a far more animalistic fighting posture, a state where I feel they essentially battle like a cornered animal. And I must warn you, when they enter this state, they become shockingly mobile and fast for a creature of that immense size, so I would tell you to be extremely careful. But in my experience, by the time this happens, they are usually on their last legs anyway. So, moving forward, I am aware of 5 known Demi-Human queens spread across the lands between. A few of them even possess names such as Gila, Margot, and Maggie, while others, it seems, prefer to remain nameless. Each one, I believe, appears to be in control of that specific region's tribe of Demi-Humans. What's particularly interesting to me is that there are even a couple of Demi-Human clans that seem to be functioning entirely without a queen, like the ones I have personally found in the Mountaintops of Giants and in Caelid. Now, there is, naturally, the chance that these particular groups are just a detachment from one of the larger tribes, dispatched to scavenge these desolate wastelands. This scenario seems less plausible to me for the ones in the Mountaintops, given how inaccessible that region is, but I think it could definitely be the explanation for the rather small band I located in Caelid. In both of these situations, however, I've observed that they seem to have entered into conflict with another race of scavengers, identified as the Winged Dames, and their accompanying hordes of giant bats. Now, I have watched the Demi-Humans generally make quick work of the giant bats, but I find that without the assistance of a queen, the Dames, well, they are simply a bit too formidable for a lesser band of Demi-Humans to handle, in my opinion. This is, to my mind, especially clear with the group found in Caelid, as they are also missing a Demi-Human chief. Or it's possible they did set out with one, and he was unfortunately killed by the Winged Dames. I certainly wouldn't be shocked if that were the case, given their current predicament. They appear to me to have been forced onto a smoldering plateau, where they are effectively trapped by the Winged Dames. I imagine they are desperately trying to devise some kind of plan to escape. I mean, they are flanked on one side by ghostly sorcerers, they have a jar-checking troll at their back, and directly ahead of them are the very Winged Dames, who I presume forced them onto this plateau to begin with. Now, I think it's possible this scavenging party could have been dispatched by the Queen at Fort Haight before her death, or maybe they were sent by the Queen located all the way down in the Weeping Peninsula. It really isn't all that clear to me. All we know, as I see it, is that they do not appear to have fared well at all. Likewise, the tribe located on the Mountaintops, who I speculate might be the region's natives, or perhaps what's left of the forces from a great battle fought there, or even their descendants, though I suppose their backstory doesn't really matter. They are not, in my estimation, doing much better than their unfortunate cousins over in Caelid. These poor fellows in this snowy wasteland are also, as far as I can tell, completely lacking any form of chieftain or queen. Consequently, they seem to follow the mighty Demi-Humans as their leadership. I have seen that they tend to occupy only that specific crevice which leads up to the lofty shack, and where a number of guardian golems are just walking around. The golems, it appears to me, do not have any issue with the Demi-Humans, and I believe this particular tribe of Demi-Human survivors in the Mountaintops is probably, in my personal opinion, comprised of the most durable and overall toughest specimens of their entire species. I see it as a classic pressure makes diamonds scenario, because these individuals are surviving out here in the absolute harshest of climates. They have, by necessity, become the strongest of their kind, and as far as I can discern, the group seems too large to just be a simple scavenging party that was sent up from one of the other regions. And perhaps this horde's lack of any discernible leadership, like chieftains or queens, is simply a visible testament to me of just how poorly they are truly doing up there. As things stand, though, I believe these individuals are significantly better off than the ill-fated group in Caelid. Those poor bastards are utterly stranded on a burning hillside. Now, I firmly believe it's definitely a terrible situation to be a demi-human in Caelid or the Mountaintops. But let's contrast this with the scavenging party that was sent into Liurnia. I believe this group recently slaughtered a noble sorcerer and subsequently set up their camp on an island just south of the scenic Isle Site of Grace, which is where Patches likes to hang out. This decent-sized war party, I've found, is led by a chieftain, and they're just sort of relaxing on this island. Now, I'm not trying to say that they are thriving, or that there's even a large number of them, but I would argue they're definitively doing better than their relatives over in Caelid, and crucially, they still have their chief. It is, however, very difficult for me to say which queen they actually serve. Anyway, though, let's get back to the queens. There is a nameless one I have located leading a tribe in the very aptly named Demi-Human ruins, which are found in the Weeping Peninsula. This specific group, I have observed, seems to keep mostly to themselves. They have minimal conflict with the other inhabitants of the Weeping Peninsula, such as the Misbegotten or the residents of the Isling Village. I believe the Isling Village is a place their queen has likely advised them to avoid entirely due to its plagued nature. They also, from what I can tell, do not venture anywhere near Castle Morn, clearly for their own safety. But I have seen their occasional patrols run afoul of the Godric garrison of soldiers stationed at the tower that overlooks the forest their ruins are concealed within. This encounter, I've witnessed, usually concludes with the Demi-Human patrol being pelted by crossbow bolts until they either retreat or are all killed. There is also another, as of yet unnamed, Demi-Human queen I have found deceased at Fort Haight. I presume she was killed by the blood-mad Godric knight who had violently seized the location with a small detachment of soldiers. We can, in fact, actually see some of her loyal Demi-Human soldiers mounting what I can only describe as an insufficient siege, desperately trying to avenge her. Meanwhile, others who I presume are from the same tribe are busy fighting Godric's soldiers all across Limgrave. The band I found in the coastal cave is also, I must presume, a part of the same Demi-Human tribe. But if I am correct, then why were the war chiefs not present when the queen died? I have to wonder, did they perhaps abandon her on the battlefield? Did they leave her to her fate while they gathered as many Demi-Humans as they could to establish a new base down in that cave? Perhaps, I speculate, this was a move to either consolidate their own power or simply to lead the tribe from that new location. It isn't really clear to me at all, but I truly enjoy speculating on these minor details. And I must point out that is all just assuming that the two war chiefs were disloyal. I mean, it is possible the queen herself ordered them to flee with the bulk of the Demi-Humans. I personally find that scenario doesn't seem very likely, but it must be acknowledged as at least a possibility. Now, the named Demi-Human Queen Margot I have found commands her tribe from the Lux ruins. I presume she struck some sort of bargain with a Tibia mariner, or it's possible the Demi-Humans were there first, and the boatmen had to make a deal with them. Either way, the exterior of this location is, in my observation, patrolled by a boatman who is capable of summoning a giant skeleton, so I would strongly advise you to be careful. But aside from that, this tribe also seems to just mind its own business, from what I can tell. Margot is, however, notably a glowing-eyed Demi-Human queen. But moving on, Queen Jillica, I have seen, leads her tribe from within the volcano cave, located in Mount Gelmir. This is an active volcano that she actually shares with at least one other Demi-Human queen. Now, I must say it is unfortunate for Jillica that, not far from her lair's entrance, the area is, in my observation, heavily contaminated by the flame of frenzy. And while we aren't entirely sure if Demi-Humans can even be affected by the flame of frenzy, I think Queen Jillica appears to be taking no chances whatsoever. She is keeping her forces extremely close to home, foregoing any and all chances of scavenging. Instead, I see she has chosen to keep her clan safe from the frenzy soldiers and the blighted land surrounding them. I truly feel she drew the short straw when she decided to split the mountain with the other Demi-Human queen, who, from what I can tell, is actually doing quite well. Now, it is worth noting in my mind that Jillica also has glowing eyes at this point. I'm starting to think this feature is just meant to visually communicate that the Demi-Human queens can see in the dark. But anyway, let's move on to the final named queen, Demi-Human Queen Maggie. I've noted that, even if I encounter her at night, she does not have glowing eyes. It's possible she could be blind. I think that would be a pretty cool detail. She is, in my personal opinion, perhaps the most proactive queen out of the entire bunch, and I also think she has the best name. Maggie possesses a unique advantage that I just don't see any other Demi-Human queens having, namely, the presence of the former disciples of Grandmaster Azur. This group of runaway or otherwise displaced sorcerers, I believe, has, with their assistance, recently led Maggie's very powerful tribe to a decisive victory over a village populated by celebrants. Celebrants are, of course, those Godwin-worshipping, skin-flaying, midsummer-style enemies I've famously encountered in the Dominula windmill village and the other, smaller windmills found throughout the Altus Plateau. Azur's presence here strongly suggests to me that maybe the queen actively sought out his stone-like wisdom as counsel regarding the planned attack on this hermit village. Now, I am almost certain this is the only location in the entire game where this complex relationship between a group of sorcerers and a tribe of demi-humans is actively depicted. It is, talked about somewhat in item descriptions here and there. I personally always got the vibe that the sorcerers really only taught the demi-human queens magic as some sort of gag. Just to see if it was even possible. I kind of imagine it being like how the first humans were probably trying to teach gorillas how to use sign language and things like that. I don't know. I'm admittedly not knowledgeable on that specific topic, but that was the initial vibe I got. And I think that probably was the attitude that several of the sorcerers had. But these sorcerers, the ones I see hanging out with the demi-humans in the hermit village, I feel they seem to be actual members of the tribe. They are, in essence, sort of honorary members. Yes, I believe they are obviously exerting influence over the tribe and, quite possibly, even controlling it to some degree. But I think the reason they are there in the first place is that they simply cannot return to the Raya Lucaria Academy, because, as we know, the doors have been sealed. No one is allowed in or out while the war rages on, although I am aware there are obviously ways to circumvent this. Plus, there is also the fact, as I understand it, that Azur and presumably his disciples as well were driven from the academy, or at the very least they fled. They did this so that they could, quote, practice their heretical magic elsewhere. The primeval current and the study and reverence of it was, from what we have already talked about in my Selen video, was no longer welcome at the College of Raya Lucaria. I presume they were forced to thug it out in the wilds and learn to fend for themselves. It is not difficult for me to see why they would have sought out this particular demi-human tribe and forged what I see as a mutually beneficial relationship. These sorcerers seem to me perfectly content to stay with the demi-humans, primarily because they really don't have much of another choice. And hell, I wonder if maybe that's the real reason they convinced the queen to attack the hermit village in the first place. This is all assuming she did attack it based on their urging. Maybe these sorcerers just wanted a village to live in, as opposed to the woods or some disgusting, shitty crystal cave. And I think they knew that befriending this demi-human tribe, teaching the queens some magic, could make that very possibility a reality for them. Or maybe, I wonder, these sorcerers just went a bit native. They're cursing out, perhaps after witnessing the unspeakable horrors that the lands between had to offer. I think these guys simply just went a little nuts and are now functioning as a sort of council of advisors to this demi-human queen. We can see pretty clearly how the lesser demi-humans revere these sorcerers. It would not be too hard for me to believe that this reverence went to their heads a little bit. And honestly, why shouldn't it have? I believe these guys were the actual disciples of Grandmaster Azur, the man who created the strongest spell in the game. It was, I'd wager, probably his idea in the first place to go live amongst the demi-humans. I only failed to mention him earlier because, at this point, he's not doing much of anything anymore. He's just kind of chilling, which is, I would assume, well-deserved after going through whatever it is he's presumably gone through, cosmically and otherwise. But my point is, it is not difficult for me to see why Demi-Human Queen Maggie is in the best possible position, at least when compared to her other contemporary Demi-Human queens. She has the full backing of a whole group of disciples of a Grandmaster of Sorcery. I mean, as I see it, it's not rocket science. Now, before I begin to wrap things up, there is one final thing I wanted to address. Why exactly does their blood boil at night? I know I touched on it briefly in the introduction, but let's expand on that a little bit. Obviously, I have found there is no definitive answer, at least not one that I can find. But we can speculate, which you guys know I absolutely love to do. Personally, my theory is that I think they have some kind of connection with the Sun Realm. This is an area that has, in my view, since fallen into obscurity, following an attempt to drain the sun of its power on the Order of Mikla in a desperate effort to resurrect his slain demigod-kin, Godwyn. This, however, does not appear to have worked, but the sun, or at the very least the seat of the sun, has faded into obscurity, or so it seems to me. As I see it, Castle Sol's primary purpose was dedicated to this draining of the sun's power. Mikla, I assume, stashed an entire army of Undying, ghostly banished knights, and some Albinaurics there for the express purpose of guarding this project. But even by the time of the base game's events, this does not appear to me to have been successful. And we all see Godwyn in his current state, and he sure as hell does not look resurrected, at least not in any traditional sense. I believe the Demi-Humans are, at least possibly, the descendants of the original inhabitants of that sun realm. I believe this has something to do with the omen horns and the beast-like quality of the crucible. I don't quite have enough information at this time to build a full theory on that, but I promise I am working on it. Which reminds me, this human and beast hybridization-like design of the Demi-Human is, in my eyes, very similar to that of the lion dancer from the trailer for Shadow of the Erdtree. And while the Demi-Humans obviously lack omen horns, I have noticed that some of them do wear goat horns on their back, specifically the chieftain. And I wonder if maybe they do this precisely to evoke the appearance of an omen horn, much like the one seen on the lion dancer. The glowing eyes on some of the queens are also, I find, very reminiscent of the eyes on the lion puppet. But as far as I can tell, that is where the similarities end. If I have missed anything, please let me know in the comments. So here is my final take on the Demi-Humans. I genuinely don't believe they are a complicated people. I find the vast majority of their interactions with the wider world can be distilled into a single word: conflict. But let's be honest, it's not as if most of the factions they come into conflict with are paragons of virtue anyway. The Demi-Humans are, at their core, territorial. They only truly initiate hostilities with people when those people trespass into their domain. Therefore, you cannot really blame them, in my personal opinion, if they sporadically ambush you as you traverse the map, ride along the roads, or, venture too close to Mount Gelmer. It's my understanding they are even known for integrating rune bears into their ambush strategies. Oh yeah, and one last thing. While I find their potential relationship to the Beastmen to be questionable at the absolute best, the parallels are there and cannot be ignored. They must be factored into any discussion. But, in my mind, these similarities do not definitively prove whether the Demi-Humans are an offshoot race of Beastmen, or if they are the descendants of relations between Beastmen and humans. I have found no conclusive answer. To be perfectly frank, I actually don't believe there is that much of a direct link between the two races, but the evidence is what it is, and I feel it must be acknowledged. So, as unsatisfying as it might be, I don't really possess any definitive conclusions, which I find is common with this particular topic. But for me, it remains something that is incredibly fun to speculate about. And last but not the least, Demi-Humans successfully run a complete monopolistic racket on the supply of rope in the lands between. And I believe that is truly everything I wanted to express regarding the Demi-Humans. And that is it for today. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.